What if I told you the most powerful drug lord in history didn't start with a cartel, but with a bicycle, a mask, and a pocket full of tombstones? This isn't fiction. It's not Hollywood. It's the terrifyingly true story of a man who turned street crime into a billion-dollar global empire. A man who could bring entire cities to their knees, bribe governments, and build a prison so luxurious it looked like a five-star resort. His name? Pablo Escobar. But you don't know the real story not like this. Long before the world knew his name, before the kingpins and cocaine, before the billions in body counts, Escobar was just a kid from the dust-filled streets of Medellin, Colombia. He wasn't born into a mob family. He wasn't handed wealth. In fact, he started from the absolute bottom graveyards. Literal graveyards. As a teenager, he scraped by stealing tombstones from cemeteries, scraping off the names with acid or sandpaper, and reselling them like used furniture. It was grim, disrespectful, but profitable, at least for a while. Yet Escobar wasn't content with small-time schemes. He wanted power, fast money, and fear, and tombstones couldn't buy that. So he traded in gravestones for guns. He got himself a bicycle and a pistol and started robbing local stores in lightning-fast raids. In and out in under 30 seconds. A mask on his face, a weapon in his hand, and no hesitation. It became a routine. The targets changed, but the formula remained the same. He'd ride in, point the gun, grab the cash, and vanish into the Medellin night. But even that wasn't enough. Soon he brought his cousin Gustavo into the mix. One rode the bike, the other stormed the shop. They were efficient, calculated, and fearless. And in a city already simmering with poverty and desperation, nobody could stop them. Still, Pablo saw something bigger, more daring, and infinitely more profitable. One day he made a connection that would change everything, a crooked car dealer. This man ran a brilliant but sinister side hustle. After selling a car to a customer, he'd secretly make a duplicate key and pass it straight to Escobar along with the buyer's home address. That night, Escobar would quietly drive off with the vehicle, untouched and unbothered. No alarms, no police, just smooth, silent theft. But even smooth criminals get caught. One fateful night in his early 20s, Escobar was nabbed mid-heist. It was the first major dent in his armor. He was thrown in prison, but what looked like a fall became his greatest rise. Behind bars, Escobar didn't sulk or scheme for a quick escape. He studied, he networked, he listened. And what he learned wasn't just how to steal better, it was how to build an empire. An empire fueled by kidnapping, fear, and drugs. When he got out, he went right back to car theft, but this time with a new twist. He realized car crime was everywhere in Medellin, so instead of competing, he created a monopoly. He started offering insurance. For a steep fee, Escobar would guarantee that your car wouldn't be stolen. Not by him. Not by anyone, because by now he controlled most of the thieves in the city. If you paid him, your car was safe. If you didn't, well, you'd wake up to an empty driveway. It was genius, twisted, but genius. His violent reputation helped seal the deal. If someone owed him money and refused to pay, he wouldn't just rough them up. He'd kidnap them, demand ransom, and sometimes, even after the ransom was paid, he'd kill them anyway, just to send a message. People got the message loud and clear. Soon, Escobar's name inspired real fear and real loyalty. His network grew. His power stretched beyond car theft and into something darker, something far more profitable: kidnapping. One of his first major moves? Abducting a wealthy industrialist named Diego Chiviera. Diego wasn't just rich, he was hated by the working class. He owned factories that had recently laid off hundreds of poor families in Medellin. So when Escobar's men grabbed him and demanded a $50,000 ransom, many locals cheered. Even though Diego's family paid the ransom, he was strangled and dumped in a moat. It was cold, ruthless, but strategic. Because Escobar wasn't just killing, he was building a myth. He wasn't just another thug. He was positioning himself as a kind of twisted Robin Hood. And for the poor in Medellin, desperate for any savior, the myth worked. Then came 1971, the moment that changed everything. Escobar was 22 when he entered the world of cocaine. At first, he worked under a major dealer named Pablo Restrepo. He moved small quantities, low risk, lower reward. But that wasn't Pablo's style. He wanted the whole pipeline. So he started making direct trips to Ecuador, the heart of coca farms. He bought massive amounts of unrefined paste, hauled it back to Colombia, and processed it into powder in makeshift labs. Then he did something no one saw coming. He didn't just sell to local users. He went international, especially to America, where demand was exploding. Escobar's first shipment brought in $100,000. One operation, one score. That's when it clicked. This wasn't crime anymore. This was a business. Weeks later, his boss, Fabio Restrepo, was mysteriously assassinated. No one could prove who ordered the hit, but everyone suspected Escobar, especially those closest to him. Still, with Fabio out of the way, Pablo stepped in as the undisputed kingpin of Medellin's drug scene. And it didn't stop there. By 1976, at just 26 years old, Pablo had everything: a wife, a 15-year-old girl named Maria Victoria, an army of smugglers, and access to more money than he knew what to do with. His pilots smuggled cocaine into the U.S. by the ton. Each flight could carry 11,000 kilograms of product. Some pilots earned $500,000 per trip, but the empire almost crumbled. Just 2 months after his wedding, Escobar was caught returning from Ecuador with a massive drug load. This time, it wasn't just petty crime, it was federal. The kind of case that could land him behind bars for decades. He tried bribing the judge, but this judge wasn't for sale. So Escobar did what only Escobar could. He found the judge's estranged brother, struggling lawyer, and paid him a fortune to represent Pablo in court. With the brother now serving as defense counsel, the judge was legally forced to step down due to conflict of interest. His replacement, much easier to handle. Escobar walked free. That trial changed him. He realized justice could be bought, laws could be bent, governments could be owned. And with the kind of money he was making, there was no ceiling to what he could control. Within just a few years, the drug trade transformed Colombia. Banks overflowed with deposits. Smuggling routes multiplied. Escobar bought farms in Ecuador and Panama, not just to buy from the source, but to own the source. And back in Medellin, his labs worked around the clock, converting paste into powder, shipping it across borders like clockwork. At the peak of his power, Pablo Escobar controlled 80% of the global cocaine trade. That's not a typo, 80%. He was pulling in more cash than most Fortune 500 companies. Forbes listed him as the seventh richest man on earth, with an estimated $30 billion fortune. But many close to him insisted that figure was laughably low. No one could even guess how much cash he had stashed in jungle vaults, underground bunkers, and inside the walls of his many palaces. And yes, he had palaces, dozens of them across Colombia in America and beyond. Private zoos, exotic animals, armies of guards. He didn't just live like a king, he lived like a god, untouchable, worshipped. But Escobar knew power wasn't just about fear, it was about love. And the poor in Medellin loved him. He built schools, hospitals, churches, playgrounds. He turned slums into communities. His name was sung in the streets like a savior. To them he was Robin Hood, and it worked. He had the police in his pocket, judges on his payroll, politicians in his Rolodex. In Medellin, nothing happened without his permission. He even had a catchphrase, plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take a bullet. But Escobar didn't want to stay in the shadows forever. He wanted legitimacy, recognition. He wanted to be seen as more than a criminal. He wanted to rule. So in the early 1980s, he ran for Congress, and he won. Pablo Escobar, the world's most powerful drug lord, was now a sitting member of the Colombian House of Representatives. He had diplomatic immunity, a visa to travel to the U.S. and the legal shield to do whatever he wanted. But not everyone was afraid. A brave congressman named Rodrigo Lara dared to call him out. On national television, in front of Parliament, in newspapers across the country. And suddenly, the myth began to crack. Escobar's mask of legitimacy slipped. He was ousted from Congress, his immunity stripped, his property seized. Even the Catholic Church turned its back on him. Then came the moment that changed everything. Rodrigo Lara was shot 7 times in his car, murdered in cold blood. And that was the moment the war truly began. The shots that killed Rodrigo Lara didn't just silence a man, they ignited a nation. The moment Lara's blood spilled onto Colombian soil, the war was no longer just between Escobar and the justice system. It became personal, political, biblical. The United States responded within hours. President Ronald Reagan called for a total clampdown on drug trafficking. Joint operations were greenlit. Intelligence networks were activated. The message was clear. This wasn't just about cocaine anymore, it was about national security. Colombia had no choice. They had to act, fast. The people were enraged, the media was on fire, and politicians were lining up to prove they weren't in Escobar's pocket. Suddenly, the man who once walked through the halls of Congress with a smirk was now public enemy number 1, not just in Colombia, but in the entire Western Hemisphere. Escobar did the unthinkable. He vanished. Fleeing the country, he slipped through the cracks of South America, from Panama to Nicaragua, bouncing between safe houses and sympathizers. But while he was gone, something dangerous began to stir in Medellin. Without its king, the cartel began to crack. Different factions jostled for power. Loyalty became a question mark. And then someone made a mistake. They kidnapped his father. No ransom, no warning, just a message. The empire was crumbling. Escobar erupted. He activated his private army men, trained not to ask questions, only to kill. Dozens of bodies began dropping across Medellin. Anyone even suspected of involvement in the kidnapping was executed. Friends, enemies, bystanders, it didn't matter. Escobar sent a message: touch my blood, and I'll drown you in yours. His father was returned, alive, unharmed. But Escobar had seen enough. He came home. And this time he wasn't hiding. If the government wanted a war, he'd give them one. Back in Medellin, Escobar launched a full-scale campaign of terror. Judges who supported extradition to the U.S. assassinated. Politicians who spoke his name in vain bombed. Security officials bribed or buried. In just a few short months, Escobar ordered the killings of over 30 judges. The country's legal system began to collapse under the weight of fear. But then came the move that shook the world. In November 1985, Escobar paid a paramilitary group known as M19 to storm Colombia's Supreme Court. Their mission? Kidnap the top justices and force the government to abandon the extradition treaty. It was chaos. Gunfire echoed through the marble halls. Hostages screamed. Files burned. And by the time it was over, 11 of the 24 justices were dead. The building was scorched. The nation was broken, and Escobar's message was louder than ever. Extradition is death. Colombia declared a state of emergency. Armed forces flooded the streets. Helicopters circled Medellin. But still, no one could touch him. His city was locked down tighter than a military base. The police were on his payroll, the mayor, his puppet. Judges, either bought or buried. And through it all, he kept smiling. But behind that smile was a man under siege. With U.S. pressure mounting and bodies piling up, Escobar finally proposed a deal. He would end the violence, cease all criminal activity, and turn himself in under one condition. He would build his own prison, staff it with his own guards, and control his own incarceration. Insanity? Yes. But the government said yes. They were desperate. The killings had to stop. So in 1991, the deal was sealed. Escobar surrendered and was transferred to a self-built compound called La Catedral, a prison in name only. In reality, a luxury resort. The walls were high, yes, but inside there was a jacuzzi, a bar, a soccer field, a disco. Professional chefs, massage therapists, and even call girls were flown in. It was a billionaire's vacation home disguised as a prison. And while the government boasted that Escobar was finally behind bars, he was running the entire cartel from inside. The cocaine never stopped. The murders never stopped. Only the headlines did. Until one day, the illusion shattered. A whistleblower leaked evidence that Escobar was still directing massive drug shipments from inside La Catedral. The government, humiliated, decided to act. They planned a secret transfer and ambushed move Escobar to a real prison. But Escobar was always one step ahead. The night before the raid, he disappeared, gone. Again, now it was open season. The manhunt resumed, bigger, bloodier, and more dangerous than ever before. And this time, Escobar wasn't just being hunted by the police or DEA. A new force had risen, one unlike anything Colombia had ever seen. They called themselves Los Peps, short for people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They weren't lawmen. They weren't criminals. They were victims. Survivors, relatives of those murdered, extorted, or destroyed by Escobar's reign. And they were done playing fair. Los Peps declared war. Their mission was simple: destroy everything and everyone tied to Escobar. Cartel members, families, friends, lawyers, accountants. If your name was in his address book, you were marked. They became the Shadow Army, and unlike the police, they didn't hesitate. They bombed safe houses, gunned down lieutenants, burned entire neighborhoods to the ground. Even innocent people close to Escobar's crew weren't spared. It was Pablo's violence turned back on him tenfold. The government turned a blind eye. In fact, many whispered they were helping Los Peps, feeding them intel, funding their crusade. Because while Escobar was hiding in safe houses and jungle bunkers, Los Peps were turning his empire into ash. Within months, his closest men were dead, his operations crippled, his money trails burned, his family forced to flee. And for the first time in over a decade, Pablo Escobar was truly alone. He stopped trusting everyone. He stopped using phones. He slept in the woods, on rooftops, in sewer tunnels. His beard grew. His paranoia consumed him. The king of Medellin was now a ghost hunted, not by justice, but by vengeance. And then came December 2nd, 1993. A single mistake ended everything. Desperate to hear his son's voice, Escobar used a satellite phone to make a short, scrambled call. He thought it was secure. It wasn't. The call was traced. Within minutes, a joint task force of Colombian police and U.S. intelligence pinpointed his location, a modest two-story home in a Medellin suburb. They moved in fast. A battering ram shattered the door. Gunfire erupted. Escobar, barefoot and panicked, fled to the roof. He ran, jumped, crawled, but he was 44 years old now, slower, tired. A bullet tore through his back, then another, and another. He collapsed face first onto a hot concrete rooftop just meters from escape. The man who once held the world hostage was now a corpse in his own city. They paraded his body through the streets. News cameras swarmed, reporters cheered. Officials smiled, but then something strange happened. More than 25,000 people, many of them poor, many of them grateful, came to his funeral. Women wept, children threw flowers, men bowed their heads. To some he was a murderer, to others a saint, to history a contradiction too large to fit in a single sentence. Pablo Escobar was dead, but the war he started still very much alive. The day his body hit the morgue, Medellin didn't breathe a sigh of relief. It flinched, because when a man like Escobar dies, he doesn't just leave a hole, he leaves a power vacuum. And in Colombia, vacuums don't stay empty for long. What the world didn't realize, what no one wanted to believe, was that Pablo's death was just the beginning of something far darker. In the days following his execution, Los Peps continued their rampage. Hundreds of former cartel members were hunted down and executed in back alleys, motels, even in their homes in front of their children. Anyone suspected of helping Escobar, even if they hadn't lifted a finger in years, was fair game. The government claimed victory. The U.S. celebrated. The agents posed with the body like it was a trophy. But deep in the slums of Medellin, people mourned loudly, and in their mourning something began to stir. See, Escobar didn't just run a drug empire. He built an identity. For many, he wasn't a criminal. He was the only person who had ever fed them, the only one who built them homes, schools, hospitals. He wasn't a kingpin. He was a godfather, and gods don't die. They transform, and Escobar he transformed into legend, the kind of legend that draws pilgrims. Years after his death, people began traveling to Medellin just to walk the same streets he once ruled, to see the zoo he built, the estate where hippos still roam wild. The prison palace with its jacuzzi still intact. Murals of his face bloomed on city walls like holy icons, tattoos, t-shirts, tour guides. Pablo Escobar became tourism. Colombian officials tried to erase him. They renamed neighborhoods, bulldozed his old houses, tried to scrub his name from the textbooks. But you can't erase a ghost, especially not one who may have hidden billions. That's right. Before he died, Escobar was sitting on an ocean of cash. Some say he made over $100 billion in today's money, and almost none of it was in banks. It was buried, hidden, stashed in places only he and a handful of trusted men knew. Problem was most of those men were dead, and the few who remained, they weren't talking. So the world began to dig, literally. All across Colombia, treasure hunters with shovels and metal detectors scoured jungles, farms, and riverbanks. People found duffel bags stuffed with cash, barrels filled with plastic-wrapped bricks of $100 bills, and even furniture carved hollow and packed with cocaine-stained currency. But what really shook the world, what made headlines in every major paper, was a letter. A single letter discovered inside the false wall of one of Escobar's abandoned mansions, sealed in wax, addressed simply, Para el Ultimo, for the last one. Inside was a map, coordinates, and a warning. If you find this, you'll be hunted like I was. But if you don't find it, someone else will, and they won't be kind. To this day, no one knows if the map was real or just a sick joke. But within a week of the story leaking, 5 separate explorers had vanished in the Colombian wilderness. No bodies, no ransom, just silence. The media moved on. But the myth didn't, and neither did the business. Because while the Medellin cartel crumbled, its roots remained. Its labs, its contacts, its soldiers. And into that vacuum stepped new monsters. The Cali cartel, the Norte del Valle cartel. Smaller, smarter, more surgical. No more flashy zoos or self-built prisons. These men had learned from Pablo's mistakes. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Launder the money. Keep your name out of the headlines. And yet, they all owed their existence to him, to the man who made the world's deadliest trade look like business. But the most terrifying part? Pablo Escobar wasn't just a blueprint for drug lords. He became a playbook for governments. In the years after his death, intelligence reports leaked suggesting that Escobar had ties far beyond what was public. That some of his shipments were escorted across borders with the help of state actors, that some of his weapons were supplied by agencies who later denounced him, that some of the men tasked with hunting him were once on his payroll. One document allegedly classified by the CIA claimed that during a critical moment in the 1980s, Escobar had struck a temporary cooperation agreement with certain anti-communist factions in Central America. He provided funding, arms, and logistics. In exchange, protection, access, silence. The drug war, it turned out, was never just about drugs. It was about control. And Escobar had mastered it better than anyone. But the final, most shocking twist? In 2022, nearly 3 decades after his death, a family in rural Colombia discovered a massive underground vault while building a house extension. Inside, over $700 million in water-damaged U.S. currency, crates of military-grade rifles, and a box of undeveloped film reels. When digitized, the reels showed a younger Pablo Escobar confessing to camera. He looked thin, pale, agitated. He stared into the lens and said, "They think I'm the monster. Maybe I am. But I was never the only one. They needed me. They used me. And when I became inconvenient, they made me disappear." The footage cut to black. No one knows who filmed it or why it was buried. But that recording, just 19 minutes long, was quietly acquired by an anonymous buyer at an auction for $12 million. It's never been seen again. Some say it holds proof that Escobar's reach went far beyond Colombia, that his money greased the wheels of entire governments, that the war on drugs was a lie built on the back of one man's empire, and maybe, just maybe, he knew exactly how it would end, because Pablo didn't fear death. He planned for it. So when the bullets came, when the rooftops of Medellin turned red, he wasn't surprised. He was ready, but he also knew something the world is still trying to understand. You can kill a man, you can burn his empire, but you can't kill a myth. And in every back alley deal, every kilo smuggled across borders, every politician with too much cash and not enough answers, Pablo Escobar still breathes. Because the king is dead, but the kingdom still very much alive.